If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you I was just stressed. Stress from work, stress from bills, stress from being a single mom of 2 kids under 10. Who wouldn't be stressed? But then, things got weird. Not just, I'm tired, weird. Terrifyingly weird. One afternoon, while standing in line at the grocery store, I felt this massive wave of panic rise up in my chest. Totally out of nowhere. My hands shook so badly I dropped my wallet. I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like the world was tilting sideways. The cashier's voice sounded muffled, like I was underwater. Someone behind me asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about being fine, grabbed my bags, and stumbled out of the store. Blinking against the sunlight like a mole. I sat in my car, heart pounding, palms sweaty, wondering if I was dying. Panic attack? Maybe, but I didn't have time to think about it. I had dinner to make, homework to supervise, laundry to fold. Over the next few weeks, the attacks kept coming. First once a week, then every other day, then every day. And it wasn't just panic. It was brain fog so thick I'd forget what I was saying mid-sentence. It was deep, crushing sadness that would roll in like a thundercloud and pin me to the bed. It was irritability so fierce I couldn't stand the sound of my kids' laughter. Every doctor I saw said the same thing: you're anxious, maybe depressed. Here's a prescription for an SSRI. Try yoga. Get more sleep. But I knew something else was wrong. My body was trying to tell me something, and no one was listening. The strangest thing was that alongside all the mental stuff, my stomach had become a battlefield. Every meal left me bloated like I was 6 months pregnant. Random stabbing pains would wake me at night. I swung between constipation and diarrhea like a cruel joke, and yet nobody connected the dots, not even me. Until the day I met Dr. Emily Carver. I wasn't even supposed to see her. She was a last-minute fill-in at the small, functional medicine clinic I dragged myself to in pure desperation. Her waiting room smelled like lavender instead of antiseptic. There were actual plants, and calming music played through hidden speakers. Dr. Carver sat across from me, listening, actually listening, as I poured out everything. The anxiety, the fog, the sadness, the stomach pain, the gas, the bloating. When I finally finished, she leaned forward, tapping her pen against her clipboard thoughtfully. Has anyone ever talked to you about the gut-brain axis? She asked. I blinked. The what? The gut-brain connection, she said. Basically, the idea that what's happening in your gut affects what's happening in your brain, and vice versa. It sounded like something off a late-night infomercial, but her face was serious, compassionate. I didn't know it yet, but this conversation would mark the beginning of the most painful and powerful journey of my life. A journey that would teach me how deeply, silently, the body can betray itself and how fiercely it can fight to heal. If only we know how to listen. I left Dr. Carver's office that day with a mix of hope and skepticism gnawing at my insides. Could my gut really be causing my panic attacks? My depression, the brain fog that made it impossible to remember my own phone number some days. It sounded far-fetched, but deep down, something clicked. Something felt right in a way none of the just take this antidepressant talks ever had. Dr. Carver had ordered a series of tests: stool analysis, food sensitivity panels, inflammatory markers, stuff no regular doctor had even mentioned. We're going to get to the bottom of this, she had promised. In the meantime, she gave me homework. No gluten, no dairy, no sugar. Start a high-potency probiotic. Begin a food journal, noting not just what I ate, but how I felt afterward. Physically and emotionally. At first, it felt overwhelming. I mean, no sugar? Was she kidding? Sugar was practically its own food group in my life, but the very first night after starting the plan, I noticed something tiny. Almost insignificant. I slept through the night. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd done that. It was like my body was a wild animal that had finally settled, if only for a few hours. The next morning, I actually woke up feeling almost human. Still tired. Still fragile, but the crushing despair wasn't there like a heavy stone on my chest. I clung to that tiny improvement like a life raft. Weeks passed. The testing results trickled in, each one revealing more of the hidden war raging inside me. Severe gut dysbiosis, inflammation markers through the roof. A leaky gut so bad that undigested food proteins were leaking into my bloodstream, triggering immune responses that attacked my own tissues, including my brain. "You're not crazy," Dr. Carver said when we went over the results. "Your body's been screaming for help for a long time." I cried then, right there in her office, big, gulping sobs that embarrassed me but that I couldn't stop because for the first time someone believed me. Someone had proof that this wasn't all in my head. It was in my gut. It had always been in my gut. Dr. Carver explained that 90% of the body's serotonin, the neurotransmitter that helps regulate mood, is produced in the gut, not the brain. She showed me diagrams of the vagus nerve, the superhighway connecting my stomach and my mind. She talked about the microbiome, the vast community of bacteria that, when healthy, keeps everything in balance and when sick, creates chaos. "You can't fix your mind without fixing your gut," she said. "And you can't fix your gut without fixing your life." That last part hit hard because fixing my gut wouldn't just mean swallowing supplements and cutting out cupcakes. It meant looking at my whole life, my stress, my trauma, my toxic relationships, my constant people-pleasing. It meant facing the truth I had spent years running from. I wasn't just physically sick. I was emotionally bankrupt, and healing wasn't going to be easy. It was going to hurt, but for my kids, for myself. I had to try. I had to believe that it wasn't too late, that my body could still find its way home. The first few weeks of my new healing plan were harder than I expected. Changing my diet felt like an impossible challenge, like I was trying to live in a world that didn't understand my needs. Everything I loved, everything that comforted me was suddenly off limits. Coffee? Gone. Chocolate? Gone. Bread? I might as well have been told to give up oxygen, but there was something else I hadn't anticipated, the emotional fallout. Without the comfort of sugar, carbs, and caffeine, I began to really feel everything. And I didn't like it. I had spent years numbing myself with food, distractions, and busyness. Now, there was nothing to hide behind. It was like peeling away layers of protective armor, only to find raw vulnerability underneath. The first wave of emotion hit me like a tidal wave. I sat in my living room one evening, holding a plate of steamed vegetables and grilled chicken, trying to muster the will to eat it. But instead, tears began to fall, soft and slow at first, then faster, until my whole body was shaking with sobs. I couldn't remember the last time I had allowed myself to cry, the last time I let myself feel the deep grief I had buried for so long, the fear that I had somehow ruined my life, my health, and my future with years of neglect. But Dr. Carver had warned me. Healing would bring up everything I had stuffed down, and I needed to confront it. So I cried. I cried for my past, for the mistakes I had made, for the relationships that had hurt me, for the fear that had controlled me for so long. I cried for my gut, the part of me that had been screaming for help and was ignored for years. Then came the physical symptoms. At first, they seemed to get worse than they'd been in years. My stomach bloated to the point where I looked pregnant again, even though I hadn't eaten anything that could explain it. I had headaches so severe I could barely keep my eyes open. My brain felt foggier than ever. I began to doubt myself, to question the whole process. Maybe I'm just getting worse, I thought. Maybe this isn't the right path. But Dr. Carver reassured me that healing often gets worse before it gets better. She called it the die-off effect. When you start killing off bad bacteria in your gut, they release toxins into your bloodstream, which can temporarily intensify your symptoms. It was scary, but it was also a sign that something was changing. As the weeks wore on, the moments of peace became longer, the bloating started to subside, the stomach cramps lessened, and slowly, so slowly, the fog began to lift. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into the process, I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching my kids finish their homework when I realized I hadn't thought about the panic attack I'd had that morning. It had just passed. The darkness that had been hovering in my mind for months had lifted, and in its place was something unexpected. Lightness. I actually felt light. Like I had been carrying a 100-pound weight for years and it had finally been set down. Dr. Carver had been right. The gut-brain connection was real, and the more I worked on healing my gut, the more my mind started to heal too. My anxiety was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. My depression was still a part of me, but it wasn't suffocating me, and when I woke up in the morning, I could breathe. By the time I reached the 3-month mark of my healing journey, I could honestly say I felt different, not cured. Healing isn't linear. And I still had days where I struggled with old patterns, where my mind tried to slip into its old, familiar grooves of anxiety and self-doubt. But it was as if I had a little more space to breathe, to move, to think that my stomach was calmer. My energy was more stable, and my mental clarity was something I hadn't experienced in years. One of the most surprising changes was the return of my appetite for life. I had spent so long buried in survival mode, just getting through each day without considering the quality of it. Now, I found myself actually enjoying small things. A cup of herbal tea in the morning, the scent of fresh flowers on my walk, and most of all, the joy of spending time with my children without feeling overwhelmed by my own inner chaos. My relationship with food had shifted too. Instead of using food to fill an emotional void, I was learning to nourish my body. The cravings for sugar and carbs didn't control me the way they once did, and I no longer felt like I had to clean my plate just to feel full. It wasn't just the food. It was my entire relationship with my body. I had spent so much of my life resenting it, cursing it for betraying me with pain and discomfort. But now, I was starting to see it as something worth taking care of, something worthy of respect. My kids noticed too. They told me I was happier now. They stopped seeing me as mom who's always tired and stressed, and started seeing me as someone who could play again, who could be present in a way I hadn't been for a long time. But there were still hard days that I wasn't magically healed, and the process of rebuilding my life and health was full of ups and downs. The emotional healing was the toughest part. There were times I was triggered, times when the past would resurface and the floodgates would open again. And yet, as I went through those moments, I felt more resilient. I knew how to handle the dark days now. I knew I wasn't going to drown in them. One afternoon, I had an aha moment. I was sitting at my kitchen table, journaling, when I realized that the hardest part of the journey wasn't just the physical healing. It wasn't the diet changes or the supplements or the hours of reflection. It was the unlearning. Unlearning everything I had been taught about food. Unlearning the mindset of push through the pain that had kept me going for so long. Unlearning the lie that my mind and body were separate entities, that healing had to be about one or the other, not both. My healing was holistic. It had to be. I couldn't just fix my gut and expect everything to fall into place. That I had to confront my stress, my emotional baggage, my chronic perfectionism. That I had to let go of the idea that my worth was tied to how much I could endure. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to change the narrative. Instead of seeing my struggles as signs of weakness, I started to view them as signs of my strength. The body wants to heal, even when we've ignored it for years. And when I thought about the future, I didn't see darkness anymore. I saw potential. I saw possibility. 6 months into my journey, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at myself, not as I had a year ago, but as I was now. The woman in the reflection wasn't perfect. She still had scars, emotional and physical, but she was stronger than she'd been in years. Her eyes didn't look tired or defeated anymore. Her posture was different. Her breath was deeper, steadier. For the first time in forever, I truly saw myself. It felt like a rebirth, like I had been given a second chance at life, one where I no longer had to live in fear of my own body or my own mind. The anxiety attacks, the dark cloud of depression, the brain fog, they didn't rule my life anymore. Yes, they still came to visit from time to time, but they didn't overtake me. I knew how to handle them now. I knew I had the power to get through them. I had learned to listen to my body, and in doing so, I had found my way back to myself. Dr. Carver had been right. It wasn't just about fixing my gut. It was about reclaiming my whole life. The gut-brain connection wasn't just some abstract theory. It was my reality. It was the realization that what happens in the gut ripples out, affecting the brain, the emotions, the soul. And as I reflected on everything I had been through, I realized something even more profound. The journey wasn't just about healing. It was about learning to trust myself again. I had spent so many years doubting my own instincts, blaming myself for the weight of the world I was carrying. But now, I understood that my body had been trying to communicate with me all along. The panic attacks, the stomach pains, the exhaustion. They were cries for help, signals that something wasn't right. And when I finally listened, everything started to change. My relationship with food, with stress, with my family, and most importantly, with myself, had transformed. I didn't expect perfection. I knew I still had work to do, but I had faith in the process. I had learned that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey that could last a lifetime. It was a journey of growth, of change, of grace. As I stood in front of the mirror that morning, I knew that I had everything I needed to continue moving forward. And while the road ahead would have its challenges, I was no longer afraid. I was no longer running from my body. I was working with it. And together, we were healing.